Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, David Russell. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com, where you learn the essential people skills to thrive in your organization or to help your organization thrive. They kind of go hand in hand. And, as I'm thinking about this upcoming episode, I'm thinking of 3 Strands Leadership. It's one of the full courses that we have in Habitly.com. In that course, I can make anyone an effective leader. It is a simple 3-step process, 3 Strands Leadership, and I can help you become an awesome leader if you give me the time. It's only about an hour in that course. Check it out, Habitly.com, 7 days free. You can't lose. It's inexpensive to use on an ongoing basis. Lots of courses, lots of micro-learning episodes. Today's interview is with Jotham Stein. He's written a book, Negotiate Like a CEO. Basically, what he's talking about is that whether you're the CEO, whether you're going into a partnership, whether you're an employee, you need to really define the details up front of what's going to happen when the partnership or the employment ends. So you define that in advance. Great segment here. I think this book may be a must read for everybody, but let's dive in and you can hear firsthand what Jotham's got to say. Welcome, Jotham, to the show. You are an attorney. We have not had a lot of attorneys. However, you have a new book out, Negotiate Like a CEO. And I think it's something that our audience needs to hear, whether you're the CEO or another employee at another level. We don't like to think legalities are negatives, but they're part of life. And so please let the audience know a little bit about your background and what led you to write this latest book.
Well, first, thanks for having me on your show, David. I really appreciate it. My background, I grew up on the East Coast on Long Island and at some point came to California, went to law school at Stanford, and I was lucky. I've been in practice now more than 25 years as a lawyer, but I was settled in Silicon Valley. That's where my office is. It always has been, although I took a digression to Illinois at some point for 11 years. But I'm back and I live in Half Moon Bay, California. So I've been practicing more than 25 years, and mostly I represent entrepreneurs, executives, people in all different stages of a company, whether they're founding it or whether they're working there, including newbie employees. And why I wrote the book, there's sort of 2 reasons. One is after all these years of experience, I realized so many people out there, whether they're entrepreneurs or starting employees or CEOs at C-suite level, they just don't know everything they need to know when they negotiate their contracts, when they go into a company, when they negotiate an employment agreement, or if you're an entrepreneur and you're negotiating an investment agreement with investors. So I figured, okay, I'm going to write a book that's going to tell everybody what they need to know from the very beginning: employment relationships, employment agreements, the documents, the tea leaves to look out for, what not to look out for. If you're an entrepreneur, what to be concerned about when you're taking an investment, what to be concerned about when you're running a company, and so forth. And basically, that's the theme of the book: is protect yourself in employment, protect yourself as an entrepreneur, protect yourself as a businesswoman or businessman. And the second reason I wrote the book, it's not just to try to give everybody all the knowledge I have from all these years, is to have a good time, a fun time. And so I did that as well. When you read the book, you'll see there's 59 stories, fictional stories that underscore what I'm talking about in the book. And, I got to sit at the Pete's Coffee House and write those stories. Had a great time doing it. And
yeah, I was thinking, how does fun go in with legal advice? I just, so the stories are fictional, but they're based on real life situations that happen.
That's right. That happened over and over again. So I got to make up the characters. I got to make up the background. Some is traveling, some is soccer, some is baseball. But stories as they relate to entrepreneurs and employees happen over and over and over again. And so someone can walk into my office, or these days on Zoom, give me a fact pattern, and I can basically sort of predict what is going to happen if they're early enough in the fact pattern, or that they should have come to me like 6 months ago. And that's what I try to put in the book. Sort of, it's like a book. If you read the book, it's like an insurance policy as an entrepreneur, insurance policy, and as an employee throughout your entire life, or your entire career, or your entire company. Now, I don't mean insurance policy in the sense that it's not going to pay you if some things go wrong. It's going to give you the information that you'll need either to protect yourself Or alternatively, if you don't have the leverage or don't want to protect yourself, you're going to go into the relationship, whether it's as an employee or as an entrepreneur, with your eyes wide open. So you can hopefully see the tea leaves and adjust in the process before things sort of go wrong for you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things come into play as I'm listening to you speak, Jotham. It comes into the hiring system. I teach a hiring system, comes into soft skills. We have habitly.com as that site. But it really, this book that you're talking about, to me, and I've been an entrepreneur since I was 15, so I'm on year 50. This should be like Entrepreneur 101 required reading, because so many of us go into partnerships or hiring employees with starry eyes of, just thinking of the positives, or if there are any negatives, we just overlook them. And like you said, we're not looking at the tea leaves. We're just tossing them out.
So that happens all the time, what you're describing, particularly with young entrepreneurs, but even with repeat players. And the issue is we all hope it's going to go well. And listen, we all know the wonderful stories where an entrepreneur started in a garage and it was like a unicorn. That's the current lexicon of these companies that go through the roof. And sometimes that works out. But we all know partners in relationships that it's gone well forever. And they're 98 years old and they're still in partnership. That definitely happens. But the other side also happens. People get forced out of their companies all the time. People get fired with no notice all the time. And often these things happen in an economically irrational way. Like if the shareholders could vote or somebody looking on the outside was doing evaluation, they'd say, why is this happening? But it does happen. And so the goal is to protect your downside and hope that everything goes really well, manage your business and manage your career, hoping it's all going to go well, but know that you're protected if things don't go well. And part of the Entrepreneur 101 of the book, or even Employee 101 of the book, C-Suite Level 101 of the book, is that somebody going into a relationship as an entrepreneur when you were 15, for example, or as an employee, even at the highest level, they don't have an appreciation for what the other side is thinking and for the information the other side has and for the dynamics on the other side. And so without that full information, you can't really negotiate the best deals for yourself. You can't maximize your own personal returns. And so that's part of why the book is really 101. For example, a new entrepreneur is taking an investment. Let's just say it's a Silicon Valley style investment, or let's say it's in Boston or some place where there's venture capitalists. Do you know and the importance of a liquidation preference is? Do you know what those documents really say? The 50 or 100 or 500 page documents you're signing where you're getting this investment as an entrepreneur? Do you know the different ways you can be screwed by investors or what they might be looking for when they look at your management team and your company? So the book tries to fill the entrepreneur in with that information. Same thing when you're going in as an employee.
I think it's really important. And, I was just speaking with somebody yesterday and they went to a retail establishment that they really liked. And there was a group of young men there that were kind of collaborating, but they weren't buying anything. And she said to the person who was helping her, she said, like, who are those guys? Are they having a business meeting or something? And the person helping her said, oh, they're investors and they're making all kinds of changes. And some of them we don't like, And so this entrepreneur who was having some success apparently with the retail establishment had taken on investors, but really not understood everything he or she was giving up in doing so, because these investors were coming down and maybe not fully understanding the business and making radical changes.
So that was in retail, and that was an experience that you had yesterday. I can tell you in my career, I've counseled clients that it's happened hundreds and hundreds of times. And it doesn't matter whether it's in retail or it's investors investing in software or biopharmaceuticals or travel or mobile internet games. That story that you just told happens over and over and over again. And part of the Entrepreneur 101 of the book is, well, I raised those issues. Now, again, if the person you were speaking with either had no leverage, was not interested in protecting themselves, they would use the book to go in the relationship with their eyes wide open, but would still be on the downside of the people coming into their store and changing things around. However, had they wanted to or had the leverage with respect to those investors, they could have protected themselves, and by reading the book, they would find out ways to do that.
Yeah, and I would reword what you said, which is totally legit. What you said about trying to get the best, not your terms, but the best deal for you or whatever. Really, I encourage people to look at the book because you really just need to have your eyes open, like you just said. You need to know what's your fair share, what's fair for the other person, even just making certain that's in place, because I know people who've gone into business with lifelong friends or friends who've been, friends for a long time. And the other thing of when you meet someone and you think you got something that's going to work out and you've patched together a partnership in a month to 3 months or 6 months, whatever it is, but then you don't really know them until you're in that partnership. And now you're like, whoa, how do I get out of this? I'm 50-50 and we got this mumbo jumbo buy-sell agreement, or we got nothing.
So you've just raised another issue that I've seen hundreds and hundreds of times. So again, before I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you now, I want to say that there are many times that things work out and partnerships work out and so forth. But I can tell you in multiple times in my career, the wrongdoer, the person that did the forcing out, the person that took the equity from the innocent, if you will, or the unprotected, that wrongdoer stood up at the wedding. All right. And so fights between family members, fights between college buddies, even if you think you know them, you may know them on a very personal level, interact in business, and not, unfortunately, the worst side of them, which often comes out, for example, when things have become very valuable, right? There's certain things that trigger these kinds of actions. So my point is, if you're going into business with anybody, doesn't matter what you described is it would put my tentacles up on my head. It would be about, okay, there could be real problems, people trying to patch together a partnership, or, hey, they met somebody, at a conference and they've been talking with them for 3 years and now they're finally going into business. But what do you really know about them in business? But it covers also my urge that the term I used was maximize your personal return, or protect yourself. We call it a professional prenuptial agreement. So you can't be forced out of your own place, your own company, or fired without any protection. But going to the other end of the spectrum, it does happen that family members, college buddies, people who stood up at the wedding sometimes are the wrongdoers. If you have a good contract in place, called a professional prenuptial agreement, then it's much easier, much smoother transition if things go wrong.
Yeah, interesting. It reminds me way back in the 80s when I started in the industry in 82. And there was a company called Micro D that was a computer distributor. And Ingram Micro, a book distributor, started to come into the market, to move into the market. And Ingram bought Micro D. And the president was a guy named Rich Leonetti. And Rich was a very nice guy. And he got ousted immediately after the purchase. And I met with him because I was trying to put together an industry association, which did not happen. But I asked him, I said, hey, did that really bother you that, they bought your company and, then you got kicked out so quickly? And he smiled. We were driving in a car. I'll never forget it. And he said, no, not at all. He said, because I learned years ago, the most important thing about my employment contract was how I get out of it. And so he had negotiated up front, and he didn't give me details, severance or whatever. So he was fine. It worked out fine.
So why is my book called Negotiate Like a CEO? The reason it's called Negotiate Like a CEO is most CEOs negotiate their separation agreement on day one. They negotiate their protection on day one. They negotiate the professional prenuptial agreement on day one. So just like your friend or colleague that you were speaking with, when they get forced out, if that happens, whether it's in an acquisition, which is a classic time that a CEO gets fired, or whether it happens because the board decides, hey, we don't like you anymore, for good reasons or bad reasons, or completely logical reasons or illogical reasons, that CEO is protected, just like the story you just told. So why did I call the book to give that title? Is because everybody else who has leverage can protect themselves in some regard. And people often under-negotiate for themselves or undervalue themselves. They actually can get protection and negotiate for protection, particularly the environment we have now, where there's a lot of need to hire. And they undersell themselves often, and they don't need to do that. So part of what I address in the book is making sure you negotiate to maximize your personal return. And listen, for a person coming in at a mid-level, maybe they can only get one sentence or two sentences in their employment offer letter that protects them. But that could be very valuable for them and their family, if things go wrong or if they get forced out. And to use this example, in an acquisition, people don't realize this. They often sign stock option agreements or equity agreements, restricted stock agreements, regular employees, and there's often a hidden part of the plan that they don't see because it's a document that's incorporated into the agreement they've probably never read anyway, which often allows the acquirer to cancel that option on the change of control. And so if that happens and these people are, the employees are calculating how much money their shares are going to be worth, that they just sit there and continue to vest and work hard. They're going to want to work hard, but they may not have that option anyway. There are lots of hidden things that happen in the employment relationship that a CEO protects themselves against. If they're a shrewd CEO, most CEOs do that, and that a lot of people can, regardless of what level you're coming in at a company.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, you're going and taking the opportunity because you're hoping for the best. You want it to work out. You want to advance your career. You want to make things happen. You want to solve these problems or whatever for the company. But you got to look at the flip side, that if something comes in unexpected, how are you going to be okay? Now, this makes me think of partnerships. I want to go back to partnerships because I'm curious about your opinion. I have a friend in New York, great client, and they were 50-50 partners. They had an agreement, and it had, some type of calculations or whatever for the valuation. And they were really good friends, got along tremendously, but it still took almost a year to unwind when one of them wanted to retire. And I contrast that to my grandfather taught me of a shotgun clause he used in real estate to remove the emotion, where it's up front, like what you're talking about. It was agreed that at any time one partner could come to the other and say, I want to buy you out of this piece of property for X amount, and here are the terms. And the person receiving the offer could accept the offer because they felt it was fair or even above fair. Or they could reverse and say, I don't think that's a fair price, or I'd like to stay on. I'm going to buy you out for those terms. What do you see are the most effective ways to structure something when you're going into a partnership? Because this is where I hear a lot of complaints, where up front you can negotiate how we're going to value the organization at the time that one of us wants to part company.
So there are multiple parts to that sort of question. The most important aspect is that the new partners together do this up front. They negotiate, or they get a lawyer that won't represent either of them, but will help them work through. It can be a wise and old experienced person. Doesn't have to be a lawyer, but someone who will help them work through the different possibilities. That's the most important thing, is to realize you should negotiate your protection, both sides' protection. Your grandfather's shotgun clause is protection for both parties, right? So that the company not going to be years and years of disputes and lawsuits and probably a decline of the company because people don't get along. And the most important thing is they do it up front. Then there are different ways to structure it, and that's context dependent. What kind of company it is, who the individuals are, how many partners there are. But if you're talking about 2, a shotgun clause, you're talking about 3, it could be somebody has the right to buy everybody out. That's a possibility. Another is, the classic valuation. I come up with a valuation. If I'm retiring, you have the right to buy. So, and I come up and I make an offer. And if you don't like it, you come back with another valuation. And if they're more than 10% apart, a third party appraisal is done. And that's like the answer. That's another possibility. So there are different possibilities. The question is, when you trigger them, what triggers them? Some people, context is important. 2 partners are together and one wants to retire, but he or she wants to give it to their children, their shares. Does that work? Maybe it works as an equity matter, but not as a voting matter, right? So they might have an agreement that says, okay, you can give to your children or whoever you want to give the equity to, but I get all my I get the voting rights. I get to run the business, the other side in that example. So there are different mechanisms that one could do to meet the needs of whoever the individuals are. To give you I can't say this is going to be the perfect answer, right? Even in a 2-person relationship, but there are many different ways. The key is do it up front like your grandfather. And, if your grandfather was always in business with someone else, just one person, and they all were happy with a shotgun clause, that's good. They're all going along and they know that at any moment they can get an offer to be bought out. And they can either take the offer or they can return and buy the company. So that's a perfect way of creating a smooth transition. I'm not sure how well that works between the individuals when they're both trying to build the company. If you always got to be suspicious of your partner that he's going to make an offer which presumably, if they were Machiavellian, would be done at the weakest time for the other side, right? It's when they've got a big mortgage or when they've had problems in their lives or whatever it is, when they have to pay for their kids to go to school. So you wouldn't.
Yeah.
So it's not right for everybody, but it's certainly a great way to get it done. The most important thing your grandfather did, as I'm repeating myself, but is do it up front. Do what the CEO does. Negotiate your deal, your exit deal on day one. And if you're an entrepreneur that's taking in investors, know what those investors are looking for, what the tea leaves are, what they might be interested in, so you can protect yourself and your equity in the deal.
Yeah, and I think, having a seasoned lawyer, particularly someone who's been through hundreds of these situations, and maybe I'm biased because I'm 65, but and young ones, lawyers can be very sharp, but it's kind of, you have those scars on your back, or you've been with people who have the scars on their back from mistakes, and you help people. That was my calling in life, back in 2003, was go help people avoid your mistakes. It wasn't, you're so smart, Dave. So this whole concept of things you're bringing up, like, if I want to leave it to my kids, what does that look like? And what's the voting? Or, what about equity? If I don't have voting rights, can I be diluted in my equity? Or, there's a lot of little nuances. And I love what you're saying about everybody needs to think of this stuff in advance. What happens if it doesn't work out? Maybe neither of us can buy each other out for a period of 2 years or 5 years. That whatever this clause looks like, there's so many different ways to structure it. You've probably done it, if not easily dozens of ways, but probably hundreds of ways, haven't you, Jotham?
Yeah, there are many ways to do your exit and protection. So I can't even remember the first time I advised on this, but it happens all the time. But even with your grandfather's approach, think of it this way, to talk about the different possibilities. Is that an all-cash offer? Or do you have a right to make a demand that says, I'm going to buy your company and I'm going to give you a loan over 10 years? There are different parameters that could happen. So there are, and some of the terms that are sometimes in these agreements are recipes for renegotiation, which the person with scars on their back would be able to tell you or realize that, okay, this clause is in the agreement. It could work out that way, but it may be renegotiated, but it'll either put me on a stronger position, give me more leverage, or a weaker position, depending on what the clause is, the context, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered, even when you're considering it up front, depending on of course, the transaction, depending on the relationship, what's going on. And that's why you can't sort of give overarching principles other than, negotiate from a position of leverage if you have it and protect yourself. And I call it the professional prenuptial agreement. I'd say that each chapter of the book has things to remember, which are really important. At the end, the bullet points with things to remember, which would be really important for whatever the chapter I'm discussing is about.
Yeah, I think this sounds like a great book. I wish I'd had it back in my 20s when I was doing my first companies. I got to tell you that. So it would have saved me a lot. And you go down a list of things that you have experience in. That's not just watching out for yourself, but offer letters to employees, employment agreements. You're representing the companies, the CEOs, as well as people going into partnerships or whatever. I think it's kind of a no-brainer that people should read this book and really get acquainted with it. So how do they learn more about the things you're teaching? Certainly, you can get the book on Amazon, correct? And other online booksellers?
Yes, for sure. You can type in "negotiate like a CEO" in Amazon, and it will pop up. You could get a Kindle, which is their electronic version, or a paper, paper copy. No problem. If you have Prime, they'll ship it to you there. You could also learn more about the book at the website for the book, which is negotiatelikeaceo.net, and that will give some information about the book. And there'll be some of the excerpts there, so you can read a little bit about it if you'd like. And then if you'd like to buy it, you can press the button on the website, negotiatelikeaceo.net, and it'll take you to Amazon. And then you can buy the book from Amazon.
All right. Well, I think it's fabulous what you've done. I think it's great advice, people, that you need to think about these things before diving in. And I love the fact you've got 59 stories in there that are all assembled from real life experiences that you've been through with clients. And I want to thank you for being on the show, Jotham. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Jotham, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. We'd love to hear from you, and stay tuned. More great guests coming. Bye for now.